We're ready when you are, Lee.
We'll call to order the meeting of the Budget, Capital, and Personnel Committee. And it appears that we've got a quorum present. Are there any changes to the agenda?
A couple of things on our desk here.
Oh, right.
We got two resolutions that have been placed here, not on the agenda. One is ID number 11678, creation of a position in the Criminal Justice Center. And the second one is resolution ID number 11679, accepting the Tompkins County compensation analysis. And there will be a report under number 8 from the Human Resources Commissioner, who's with us by Zoom from, what I hear, Saratoga? Wish I was up there with you. Ruby?
You need a motion to add those to our agenda?
Would welcome that, Rich.
Okay.
Motion made to add those to the agenda, second by Mike. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Where we can take up the compensation analysis, where would you like us to look at the Criminal Justice Center? Where would be appropriate?
Out under the report from the Human Resources Commissioner.
Sounds good. Thank you for the suggestion. Do we have any comments from the public today? Anybody in queue?
No.
Do not. Okay, minutes from April 10th were distributed. Are there any corrections, additions, comments?
Move to accept.
Motion made to accept, second by Amanda. Discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. County Administrator.
Thank you. Just have a few brief updates for my report. We are still working through the finer details of the New York State budget and how that will impact our 2024 budget planning. Today there was a briefing from NISAC that went through their county impact report, and so we tuned into that and we'll be following up with our departments on some of those details. The largest, of course, are being the Medicaid EFMAP and Intercept and the 18B rates, but there are other details in the New York State budget that will impact us as well. We have recently learned from our Department of Social Services of a large lump sum payment coming into the county this year that was for expenses incurred in 2021 that had to do with child welfare, adult protective, and domestic violence services. And so we're working through those details as well, and as well as some news about estimated costs and increases in electricity and natural gas in 2024 that are going to impact our budget. I see Terry Carroll's tuning in, but that, upwards of 40% increases in both electricity and natural gas that will impact us almost maybe $500,000. So again, we're working through all of these details, and we had discussed having a follow-up to our budget retreat in April, and we're looking at the end of May for a follow-up with some more details about where we stand. And And so we'll be providing that update to you and the full legislature at that time.
Thank you, Lisa. Any questions? Mike?
I remembered what I was going to tell you before the meeting. Comptroller Tom DiNapoli was in town over the weekend, and he spoke at an event for the Democratic Committee, and he was talking about the funding for the pension plans, which had been, he said, at about 102% funded. But he said this year it's down in the 90s, 98%. And he was saying that that's going to mean that they're probably going to be asking the localities to increase. He said not a huge amount, but he says it's going to be an increase in the amounts that we're going to need to supply from our pension fund. So don't know whether you'd heard that or not, but that was from the horse's mouth as of Friday.
Thank you. That provides us with some reassurance because we did factor in a small increase there. And usually by the end of August or so, we get the finer details of what the increase actually is. So I think we're probably on the right track, hopefully, with that. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. Rich?
Yeah, you mentioned a large lump sum payment from 2021. Is that out of the ordinary course, or why is this large?
We're going to be meeting with DSS to understand the whys and wherefores, but surprises of this magnitude seem to be the norm with DSS. So it's either surprises to the good or to the bad, and the pendulum seems to swing in either direction depending on the year.
Do you have a order of magnitude on what you mean when you say large?
Over $2 million.
I guess if it's going to swing one way or the other, I'd rather it was this kind of message.
We'll take it.
Yes.
Yeah. But, what we'd like to do is have a discussion with them and with our partners in finance to talk about, potential strategies for how we might be able to stabilize and bring that to you as a recommendation.
Thanks. Anything further for Lisa? If not, Lori, is this your first Oversight Committee meeting?
It's my second.
Second?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think
Well,
so.
welcome anyways. You
Thank you. Thank you.
settling in well?
Yeah, still on a little bit of information overload, but everything's going good so far.
We just love to put these meetings on Mondays so that you really load you in the first of the week. Can we ask for a report?
Sure. First, I'd like to talk about the tax foreclosures. On Friday, we received 2 more payments, so now we're down to 11 parcels at this time. Still working with a couple of them, and hopefully they'll also pay off or have an installment plan. Just a reminder, the pre-meeting auction is May 30th, and the auction is June 5th. And Drew did send out an email to you with the dates of the whole process, the last day to pay, and so on and so forth, outlining how that's going to go through the end of June. I'd also like to let you know that we've been working with the auditors that last week and this week. They will be coming on site to start to gather data for last year's audit. Also, just wanted to point out the New York State budget did reject the IMREN foreclosure proposal that spoke to returning overages. So at this time, that has been rejected. Also, this coming Friday, we have a Tobacco Asset Securitization Corporation meeting. Yep, sorry.
In REM foreclosures, so that means if we sell a property at foreclosure, we don't have to share proceeds at this point.
At this point, correct.
But the Supreme Court is getting ready to weigh in on this so that that could all be overturned.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
And just also working with the County Administrator's Office in looking at and reviewing and updating the petty cash policy is another task that we are working on currently. Any questions?
I can't count the number of times we've redone the petty cash policy through the years. Thank you.
Well, we had
Lori.
petty cash.
Yeah. Any questions for Lori?
Just a comment on the in-rem foreclosure this morning on the NISAC budget impact overview. They mentioned that while it's not in the budget, they have heard tell that perhaps the governor is taking the verbiage from what was proposed in the budget to be put in a bill for consideration. So it may still be active while we wait for the Supreme Court. So.
There are a number of things at the state level that slipped out of the budget, but they want to bring back before the session is over, so maybe that's one of them.
We know, is there an average, or I imagine there's some wild swings as far as what the proceeds from the auctions have gotten over the years. Has there ever been a report that would tell us what the impact might look like? And I doubt that we budget for any overages. Well, Drew is on there.
I am. Good question, Lee. We did look back a little bit, and we typically, it's not a dollar amount, because as you alluded to, there's wild swings. You recall that commercial property we had in Groton that went for a pretty big amount. Typically in each auction, we looked at the last 4 years, under 20 properties each of the last 4 years. And at most we have 3 or 4 properties we make money on. The rest of them, they lose money. Sometimes it's only 2 properties that we've made money on. So.
And for clarification, we make whole the other taxing entities, correct?
Correct. Towns, villages, school districts are all made whole prior to it going to auction.
So really, with this in-rem, the county is where the impact would be if there's a change in court rulings or state legislation.
Yeah, we'd have to see. I know NISAC at one time was suggesting that those be shared with the municipalities, that we would then get a credit at the county, or that there would be a state fund set aside to make us whole on those that we lose. Also factor in the additional work that could be if we have to verify lien holders in the order of lien holders.
Thanks, Drew. Any questions? Mike?
I just had a question on that, and then I started thinking about something else I wanted to raise too, so I confused myself. No, I'll pass and I'll just come back with another question.
Okay, thanks. Anything else for finance?
It was interesting, today in my law office, I had a tax bill from, town tax bill from Cuba County, town of Aurelius. And one of the line items on there was the chargeback fee for community college, that apparently must be in Cuba County, they charge back the chargeback fees that are paid to other counties to their towns. It was like $2.72. It wasn't any big deal, but I thought that was kind of interesting. I've heard about that before, but I don't think I'd ever seen it on the tax bill. So I don't know, maybe somebody someday could let us know a little about that, and whether that's anything we should be talking about, or whether it's one of those things that we're always blamed that we don't do enough for the localities. You know, there's another one we pay for.
That's interesting, Mike. Now that I'm getting Cuba County tax bills, I'll take a look at it and see. I do run into the treasurer from time to time up there, so might be an interesting study to have. Anything further for finance? Rich?
I think I mentioned this before, but Drew was very kind in giving me some time to talk about the Moody's process for bond rating. And this is something I think that it would benefit certainly BCP, but all the legislators to have some shorthand on how this is done, because I believe it would really inform us on a lot of the other things we should be thinking about, such as fund balance, which is one of the few ways we can directly influence what our bond rating is. As you all know, we have the highest bond rating we can get, and we would very much not want it to go to AA2. We're AA1. And I also think that there's some opportunity for some advocacy here, because in the discussion, it became clear that they look at college towns as similar to non-college towns to some extent. I guess now that there is what they're calling, is it an Ivy League exception or factor? But it's not very much. But because you have a high proportion of students, they look at Tompkins County as having a lot of very poor people. And Drew said in the discussions with Moody's, the Beamer argument came up, that if you go up into College Town and look around at the cars, these are not poor people. And the spending patterns in the community are not consistent with poor people. And if you look at admissions, even if there's somebody that can no longer afford to come here, there's somebody else in line waiting to come who can pay what is asked to attend here. So we are not really comparable to non-college towns, but we get rated on that basis, and that's where we really got hurt. Anyway, I think having a presentation on this so we understand the different factors and where we can have some bit of influence would be really helpful to us. Thanks.
Thanks, Rich. Lori, does that sound like something that you could help?
We can look into whatever we need to get that information, put together something.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
the information is really dense, unfortunately. So if we could draw it out that us simpleton legislators could get it, that would be a really good thing, I think.
Sure, be happy to.
Thanks, Lori. Anything further for finance? If not, we'll move along. Committee chair report, I don't have one, and I don't know that Deborah left one. She reported at last week's full legislature meeting. Is there anything from workforce diversity and inclusion? We're going to go to Ruby next for personnel. Maybe Ruby's got something there?
Not for WDIC.
Nothing for WDIC. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us. I hope we didn't take you out on any big seminars that you needed to be at.
Always, Lee. This has been a very good conference so far, and you've probably seen more of outdoors than I have. We've been going from 7:30 this morning to when I sneaked out to make sure I joined you all for the afternoon. But I'm going to make it very brief. You know, as everybody's waiting to hear about the compensation study, or the compensation analysis, as I call it. We started this process in 2021 with an RFP, or request for proposals. We went through that process and we awarded the contract to the Burke Group. Steve DePerrier is here with us today. But just a little bit, he's going to provide us with an overview of the project, some of the objectives, and an overall, the methodology that was used to come up with the figures in the report. The individual reports by bargaining unit will be uploaded to our HR webpage as soon as this meeting is over. So we won't be going over the individual bargaining unit results. Steve is just going to give us a big overview. With that being said, I'd like to introduce to you all Steve DePerrier from the Burke Group.
Thank you, Ruby. And can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. Appreciate the opportunity, and I will provide an overview, just a little bit of overview on who Burke Group is. We are a compensation consulting firm, but we're also in the pension administration, and we're actuaries. We do a lot of work with retiree medical across New York State for a bunch of the school districts, probably about 300 school districts. We have about 18 professionals here in Rochester, New York. but we have done this work for probably about 12 to 15 counties over the last, I'll say 2 years probably. So we've completed similar reviews, and we break it down into the groups that you folks would all recognize as far as the CSEA, white collar, blue collar, et cetera. And what I thought would be helpful is I was just going to provide a little bit of an overview on the methodology that we go through, and I'll use the CSEA white collar report, which again, we've done a separate report for each of the groups, and you'll have access to that. But I thought it would be helpful for me to just sort of give you a little bit of a overview on the groups that we look at when we determine market for these categories of collectively bargained group and employee populations. Obviously, we're looking at the NISAC data, which is a great source. We match up the positions that exist within Tompkins to that market data. We also look at a survey completed by ERI, Economic Research Institute, which is probably the largest database of information out there on these positions in these respective groups. We also look at, there's a survey that is done out of Rochester that really goes, I would say, as far east as really Geneva and far west as Batavia, but then north and south of those groups. And it's really become a good source of data for wage and salary information. And then we also look at the New York State Department of Labor database and the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. So it's a pretty comprehensive array of market survey information, but then we also identify a peer group of organizations that we think within Tompkins is an appropriate comparison. That includes Cayuga County, obviously the city of Ithaca, which we did a review for as well, Saratoga County, and then Seneca County. We look at sort of a $210 million budget roughly, and then we're looking at sort of a region that is the Finger Lakes region, okay? Now, when we go through and we do that, as you folks are aware, we have, and I'll talk a little bit about the CSEA white collar report that we did. I'll allude a little bit to the blue collar report as well. Overall, the uniqueness, I think Tompkins has a higher rate, and then within 9 months, they move to what we call a work rate. And that work rate is, on average, probably about $2 higher than the higher rate. And so, it's really that work rate that we compare to market when we look at it. And for example, when we look at that for, the white collar, and you'll see it in the report because it looks at every position. But then when we look at the various grades within the CSEA white collar group, overall, we're a little bit low at the higher rate. And just looking at the white collar, the CSEA white collar group, but we're right at market when we get to that work rate. So, I feel like, we're getting to that work rate after 9 months of employment. So I feel like that's, they're not waiting a long time to get to that. It's within 9 months. So overall, when we looked at that for the white collar group, we were in pretty good shape. We were essentially at 101%. And it may vary slightly as we look at the respective grades, but overall, we were at 101.1%, all right? So I thought that was, because, the CSEA group is obviously one of the first ones that we take a look at and tend to focus on. When we looked at that same report for the blue collar group, we were a little bit lower, both at the higher rate and maybe about 4 to 5% lower for that work rate that folks move to after 9 months. And these are the positions, as you all know, that are the most challenging from a market perspective. When we think about these positions, it's obviously some of the highway positions, the highway technician positions. It's the heavy equipment mechanics. These are the positions that overall many organizations are struggling with from a market perspective. But when we looked at that, you know, for the most part, we were about 4 to 5% below market, which overall is not a horrible position in this current environment. We see that for a lot of other counties, this is the most challenging group, and it's usually something more than 5%. It's probably closer to 10% that we're below market. So for Tompkins, that's, I would say, some of the good news. But again, a lot of the information that you have in these reports will allow you, when you go through that next collectively bargained process with these respective groups, you're going to have the data that allows you to really make informed decisions. But overall, this, you know, that blue collar group has been the one that, when we look across the other counties, most of those counties have been further off from the market. When we look at the confidential group, and I would say, you know, the confidential group, I think, is in a similar position to the CSEA white collar. We're pretty, we're about 2% below, 2 to 3% below the market for that group. So we're in pretty good shape there. And then the management group, slightly lower, but, about 5% below when we, again, compare the market to that work rate. All right. So, and you're going to see that those individual reports, and you'll see each of those categories. But the methodology is one where we identify what we think is market. That peer group is very helpful to us as we look at that. And then we compare what is our hire rate and what is our work rate. The hire rates are a little bit low relative to market, but if people are moving to that work rate after 9 months, and that work rate for the most part is consistent with market, I think we're doing relatively well. If we wanted to look at those higher rates as we go through the collectively bargain process going forward, we might choose to bump those up a little bit. But I think as long as people understand that after 9 months, they're going to move to that work rate, and the work rate is consistent with market, I think some of that's in the communication, and we may want to, reflect that to a certain extent as we go through the future collectively bargain process for each one of these groups. Okay. Let me stop there and ask if there are questions or comments. Again, I think you'll see the detail because it's going to show every position, but I wanted to provide you with a little bit of sort of an overview of what we found. I think we're in reasonably good shape. I think that that blue collar, that CSEA blue collar, is a little bit lower on that work rate piece, and maybe with this data we'll factor that into the next collectively bargain contract.
Thank you, Steve. And we did distribute some of the initial information to the entire legislature at last week's meeting. Do we have any questions for Steve and his group? Mike?
Thank you for all the work that you folks have done and for coming to our meeting tonight. What I was kind of wondering, when you talked about the comparison groups here and comparison counties, we seem to be Cayuga Lake and West, with the exception of Saratoga. I was wondering, did you look at all at the Onondaga County area or the Broome County area? I know you did. I believe you did a study for Cortland County.
We did,
and we saw that a few months ago. I remember reading about that.
Yeah.
So I just wonder, do we feel confident that the choices you had here would reflect Tompkins County and East? Let's put it that way.
It's a good point. When we look at Onondaga and Broome, obviously larger revenue, and you know, that revenue tends to be a fairly significant driver. But I will say this on this point, because I think it's an important point. What's happened throughout, I'll call it, I'm going to say central, and I'll even throw in Western New York and going into Eastern New York. What's happened is if we did include some of those other larger counties, I don't think the numbers would change that dramatically. And the reason for that is when we look at that, people are driving more. That's probably a logical extension, but it used to be there were differences between, you know, Buffalo was the national average, Rochester was slightly above the national average, Syracuse, Utica were somewhere maybe slightly below the national average, and we've seen all that assimilate where it all is pretty close to the national average when we look at that, and that's because people are driving from Syracuse to Ithaca to work, and from Ithaca to Syracuse to work. So when we look at these positions, because there's been a couple where we've included Onondaga and Broome in the analysis, and it doesn't increase or decrease those numbers all that significantly. And my theory is because of, you know, people are just driving more, so the region in general is assimilating to sort of the data that we have here. But we've gone through and looked at that because we looked at it with Onondaga, not necessarily Broome County, but with Onondaga, and the differences weren't that significant. And I'll validate this point because I think it's important for us to understand as well. But I think, and sometimes in a larger revenue county, it's more those management and confidential positions that tend to be a little bit higher, if anything.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Mike.
Steve, could you speak to road patrol before we get any other questions? Could you speak to road patrol and corrections?
Yeah. Okay. The corrections, you know, it's that's a group that it's harder to get sort of some current data with regard to that. You know, when we looked at it, and we can add some more information there, but when we looked at the corrections, the positions, in general, we were, as far as where we were relative to the market, we were well above, at least for the correction positions. The other, for the sheriffs, which group, were you asking about the sheriffs?
Yes, that was the sheriff / road patrol group.
Yeah, and I didn't see that, which report would they be in as far as the union group?
That would be road patrol.
But I don't, or Megan didn't give me the road, I have the correction, and the correction positions are, you guys are quite a bit above, you know, the market. So, I mean, I don't think if we're having difficulty in that category, it wouldn't be from a compensation standpoint. And the sheriffs, the road patrol, I don't have that in front of me, but we've been struggling to get some of the data on that. But I can take a look at that.
Yeah, we have copies.
Oh, my problem is I don't think I have one because I'm looking at, is the title?
Let me see. I will see if I can email it to you, and then
wait a minute. Here, hold
maybe
on.
we can. Okay.
Road patrol.
Hold on 1 second. I'll get
Getting it from Megan.
Where's the road patrol report?
The sheriff.
I'm on the call.
I'll look. Okay.
Are you going to bring it over to me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. We'll take a look at that. But I mean, is that one where? Can you bring it up or?
I have a question in the meantime, if he's going to have it.
Right.
Sure. That'd be great. That'd be great. Yeah.
I was looking at the comparison you've included, not for road patrol, but the difference between peer institutions and then the general market.
Yes.
And it seems like getting a job with a governmental entity is quite different. And so I'm struggling a little bit. How should I be doing the introduction of the market numbers compared to peer?
Yeah, so, okay, thank you. Okay, so, are you looking at a particular report, or I can speak to?
Just in general.
Yeah. So what happens for the most part is the peer data tends to be higher than the market data in general, I would say. I'm looking at the CSEA white collar group, and I would say, well, it varies based on the position, but theoretically, the market are those surveys that we use, and then the peer is a smaller group. You know, we're looking at just those 3 counties and the city of Ithaca when we look at that. So, I mean, theoretically, that peer information should be a reasonable match. The only thing we run into is sometimes with a sample size, they tend to be smaller, and as a result, if the city of Ithaca were quite a bit higher, for example, it might drive that, it might skew that data to a certain extent. The market is it's the largest sample size, so it has the most data points. Is there a particular position? Because I think it's better to go and have that discussion around a particular position.
I didn't have one in mind. It just seems that if we can compare to other governmental institutions, we're better off. But if that's really an impediment to hiring because the general market is at a different place, then I think we do have concerns. But
yeah, you know, the effort here is to try and get what is the true market that we're competing with for these positions, all right? And for example, you know, as I look at the CSEA report, you know, and I'm looking at page 8, and it's grade 16, the accounting supervisor position. The peer average is quite a bit low for that position. It's around $30 an hour, and the market for that is about $35.41. So, you know, almost $5 more an hour. That's a function of the fact that when we look at that and we say, you know, the other peers may be paying closer to $30, but you're competing with the general marketplace with that other survey data, and that's $5 more. So it may vary, but when we go to hire an accounting supervisor, I believe that we're facing that general market of those in the sort of Tompkins County region that might be some private, you know, might be some private. That's who we compete with to get that. So I think it's important for us to look at both the peer and the market average when we do that. But that was our methodology. So I think the differences between peer, I think when we look at some that we're really competing just with other counties and towns, that's one market. But when we start to look at particularly accounting, IT positions, and some of those other positions, when we expand it and we really say, hey, we're really competing against other employers in the Ithaca, Tompkins region. So, and you can see that when you see the, you know, sort of those individual reports as well. So, does that make sense?
Yes.
And there's certain things like, you know, the finance area or some of the healthcare positions like nursing positions where it's more acute right now too, because for any number of reasons, there's a shortage of qualified accountants. There's a shortage of qualified IT professionals. There's a shortage of nurses, shortage of social workers. And we think that's changing, but it's just contributing to some of these challenges.
Thanks, Steve. Ruby,
Yep.
do you want to follow up on the questions with the corrections and patrol?
Yeah, all right, now that I have that report, my apologies. Okay, so and again, it's, let me just go to the vote. Okay, so when we look at the market analysis for the various levels of sheriff, it's another area where, you know, we're looking at predominantly, you know, we're looking at that peer information. We're looking at we're really just using the peer data to look at that. And when we see that, when we go to that work rate, which is the one we focus on, we are, you know, significantly above some of those peer organizations. Now, you know, we talked about the fact that those peer organizations, you know, if we expanded that to include some of the other, you know, like Onondaga and Broome, we might get a slightly different, but when we look at that compared to the peer group, we are significantly above those peer organizations. Now, look, everybody is facing challenges with hiring sheriffs. There's a labor supply issue that's contributing that. But when we look at where we are at those various levels, we're at 30% above market and 40% once we move to the work rate. So it's another example of where, you know, we certainly are paying an above market rate, but our ability to get capable and qualified folks and keep them is more a function probably of the labor supply.
Does this road patrol, does that carry forward on corrections as well?
Yeah, it does. Best we could determine, yes.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Yep.
Any further questions? Ruby, would you like to summarize anything or add to the report?
Sure, just to remind everyone that the individual reports will be on the HR webpage under contracts. And we will be discussing recommendations going forward into the contract negotiations process.
You made the 2 points that Lisa wanted me to be sure got mentioned. Thank you.
Hey, we're the Borg.
We had added to the agenda resolution number ID number 11679, accepting the Tompkins County compensation analysis. And I'll just read the last 2 lines. Whereas the study will be used to inform the decisions during the collective bargaining negotiations that will begin in 2023, now therefore be it resolved on recommendation of BC&P that the county legislature formally accepts the 2023 Tompkins County compensation analysis. And could I have a motion? Amanda, second by Rich. Discussion on the resolution. Sounds like we've covered it pretty well. All in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Steve. Thank you,
Yep.
Ruby.
Before they go,
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Before you go, just a second.
Yeah.
I just did to have a follow-up. I don't know if, Steve, if you need to weigh in on this, but it seems like for our confidential negotiations, having another column showing where we're having trouble hiring positions would be really useful intelligence for us. That obviously we want to be as equitable to our employees and we want happy employees. At the same time, we have to look out for the taxpayer. And if some of these positions seem to be the market has adequate supply, that's something we should know. And
Rich,
likewise,
going
where we don't.
forward-
Yeah.
Going forward, we are factoring in recruitment difficulty and retention specific to Tompkins County.
So we're going to see that at some point?
Yes,
Thank you.
yes.
Thank you, Ruby. Thank you, Steve.
All right, thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Take care.
Ruby, do you have anything further to report?
No, not at this time.
We're holding you up from your conference.
No, I'm going to stick with this until it's over. That way I won't walk in the middle of a session.
Okay, well, long as you're here. We also added resolution 11678, creation of a position criminal justice center within county administration, FTE 0.5, 20-hour per week administrative assistant 1. Would somebody like to move that resolution? Amanda, second by Mike. And anybody want to comment on that or highlight it?
I believe that would be under county admin.
This was a position that has been budgeted.
Right.
It was not included in the year-end resolution, and that's why it's coming to you today.
Thanks, Norma. Rich?
Should the title be changed to Community Justice Center rather than Criminal? Thanks.
Is that a friendly amendment? Yes and yes. Okay, Community Justice Center. Thanks, Rich, for pointing that out. Any discussion? All in favor? Are there any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Ruby. We have resolutions on the agenda.
Veronica's here now.
Oh, Veronica, yes, welcome. We could back up to workforce diversity and anything else you might have for us.
You can be Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. I think one of the resolutions is from WDIC, so that works well. I already gave a report at the last legislature meeting, but WDIC met on April 26th, Wednesday before last. Did a bunch of checking in on our various goals. Some had updates, some didn't. One thing we've got now is a actual calendar of heritage months for proclamations and flags and things. So we'll hopefully be a bit more organized on that. A couple things we wanted to look more into is gender inclusion related stuff, both that will be coming back in the future, both about gender inclusive language in county written things of all kinds and how to promote that, as well as supporting pathways for employees who want to change their name and or gender marker within our county systems to be able to do so. I forgot to write down one other thing. The Jedi, the Team Jedi, which is different from WDIC, but would work closely with them if they were super active, is in the process of reconvening and reactivating and looking at what that looks like without a chief equity and diversity officer, which obviously we hope to have again soon, but also don't want to let a lot of work just fall by the wayside during that hiring difficulty. And maybe just an announcement to you all and other department heads and people in the organization, actually two announcements. One, we are hoping this year to award the Leslyn McQueen Claiborne Diversity Award again. So if you've got anyone you'd like to nominate, please let me or one of our clerks or Rachel Graham, our vice chair, know. So far it's only been awarded once to Leslyn herself, but I know there's more people doing good work. And then second, assuming we approve the bylaws now, that will make it so there is one vacancy in WDIC. So if you have anyone else to suggest for that, we're interested in that. And one demographic that is currently not represented on WDIC at all is blue-collar employees of the county. Maybe a harder one historically to reach, but especially if anyone there is interested in participating. But also really like any non-management county employee also is fairly underrepresented for what WDIC is. So if you know anyone, we'd love to have them apply, or I'm happy to talk with anyone about like what it would entail, or Rachel would as well.
Thanks, Veronica. Amanda?
Thanks. I'm looking at the bylaws that we're going to talk about in a minute. And so it says there's 2 seats for legislators, 2 seats for Tompkins County employees, 2 seats for community members, and the remaining will be undesignated. So those could be employees, those could be other community members. Is that correct?
Yes. The idea is that WDIC should be a mix of legislators, employees, and community members, and we want to never have fewer than 2 of any of those groups,
Right, okay.
but otherwise it can mix and ebb and flow.
And so what is
And right now, we do have at least 2 legislators and more than that of the others.
Okay. Is it fairly balanced then of employees and community members?
Off the top of my head, I think so. Okay, Brittany's nodding.
I would say right now there's technically they're balanced, but we do see some of the community members that haven't shown up for a couple of meetings, either due to conflicts or just not being able to be there.
Thanks, Brittany. Would somebody like to move the resolution? Amanda? Is there a second? Second by Rich. So this is for resolution of approval of amended bylaws, Tompkins County Workforce Diversity and Inclusion Committee, ID 11484, moved and seconded. Further discussion? Amanda?
Thank you for answering those questions. I guess my other question, I don't see anything in here about term limits. Was that discussed? Did I miss it in here? Does it matter?
I am not remembering if it was discussed. One thing we did acknowledge was that since consistent advisory board guidelines are being worked on, still is my understanding, that we realized we might have to change them again kind of soon. And with that knowledge, decided to update these anyway, because there's a lot we value updating, and the last time was like a decade ago.
Okay, all right, well, that makes sense. And then I was going to kind of look at Brittany and ask that question. I haven't talked with you or Katrina about that advisory board policy in a while, so, or Lisa, I don't know exactly where, if it got to administration or where it is.
Last I knew, Katrina had sent it to Jesse for her review. And I know that either she did follow up or she was planning on following up. So it should be coming to GO maybe in June, but definitely by July, I think.
Okay, well, I can follow up with her, but yeah, I would just, it's good that you know, and that maybe there might be something else that needs to change for this going forward. But thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Rich?
The Leslyn McBean Claiborne Award, could you just talk for a minute about what are the criteria? What are you trying to recognize?
Ooh, great question. No, sorry, I'm not. I don't want to misrepresent it, and I don't have it at hand.
Okay.
I can follow up later, unless someone else knows off the top of their head.
Perhaps we could circulate that to the entire legislature.
Yeah, I think a reminder to everybody would be a good idea with the specifics.
Yeah, happy
what
to.
you're looking for.
Thanks for raising that, Rich. Any further discussion to the resolution? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. We also have a couple of resolutions coming forward, updates to the administrative policy manual, and I'm kind of assuming those have been to your committee, Amanda.
Yeah, the 3 of us actually did them last week, so I have a feeling I know how Rich and Mike are going to vote.
Well,
Yeah, let's throw a curveball.
have a resolution updating the policy manual Policy 0418, meal expense reimbursement meetings, ID number 11637. Is there a motion? Amanda, second Mike. And as I read it, it's covered in lots of other policies and being removed for that purpose. Discussion? We've already had it. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion's unanimous. Thank you. Or vote is unanimous. Move on to resolution under 9C to update administrative manual, policy 06-07 for procurement, ID 11639, and that has to do with the state green procurement policy. Amanda?
Move it.
Moved, and second by Rich.
And just Kat McCarthy and Terry Carroll are here if there are other questions.
Kat or Terry, would you like to just give us a brief synopsis?
Sure, I can kind of kick it off and let Terry finish. As part of the EPP team, we realized in December that the state released a New York State Green Purchasing Communities program. In your agenda packet, there was both the resolution and just a brief overview on that program, which was really launched with the intent to make it easy for local governments to buy products and services with a lower environmental impact. And that aligns really closely with our environmental preferred procurement initiatives. So in order to participate in this program, the state does require a policy revision that would commit to using these Green New York specs to the maximum extent practicable and where it's cost competitive. And long-term, the hope is that this would make it easier to buy these products over the long run. Some of the potential benefits of participation include access to these specs that are being updated for continual improvement, recognition, as well as some additional support for our Climate Smart Communities program, which I think Terry can speak to.
Yeah, so I've mentioned this in prior meetings, so some of you may have already heard this, but the county is currently a silver certified climate smart community, which is the highest rate that we can be. That certification ends in September, so we're going out for recertification right now, and we're hoping to get the most points that we can. We currently have the most points in the state for a county, so we'd like to maintain that, and this is another way of doing it. But in addition to kind of getting that recognition as a climate smart community, I think there's a lot of benefits to be had with this. It's something that we're already taking a look at. When I'm working on a revamp of the green building policy, and we're taking a look at the Green New York specifications for lower carbon concrete. And so this is something that I think can have a lot of benefits overall. So we're hopeful that you'll be supportive of it.
Thanks, Kat and Terry. Any questions for them? If not, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you for being with us. Rich?
This came up at GO. I think you're perhaps the only person here who wasn't at GO, but I believe county administration is going to take another review of the procurement policy to address issues regarding free and donated services. So this will return to us.
Thanks for mentioning that. One other resolution, budget adjustment acceptance of New York State Healthcare Worker Bonus, HWB funding, addressing vesting periods 1 and 3, and the ID number is 11674. Do we have a motion to make? Moved and seconded. Norma or Lisa, is there anything to add to this? I know that we're processing various payments regarded to the healthcare.
The only thing I would add is that we did not add fringe to this. It was not included in one of the other reimbursements. There was, FICA was included. In this case, it was not. We could add to it a contingent fund request and modify this to include the fringe, or wait and see if the departments are short the fringe, because they are pretty small payments that are going out this time. I don't know if the finance director has any suggestions on that, but it was not reimbursed in this case.
Okay, thanks, Norma. Rich, any question?
I was just going to make a statement. I will support the resolution. However, for all the reasons we've talked about before, I just think this is a unfortunate way to run a state and to pay well-deserving employees through this bonus system, in that you're doing it sporadically. You're only doing it for some lines or job titles and not others. And given that at the same time New York State is turning around and passing all sorts of costs down to the local level, it seems like they could do a more thoughtful approach than this.
You're exactly right. They won't do it.
But I'll vote for it.
Kind of had those thoughts as I was reading the state budget summaries over the weekend. But thanks, Rich. We've had about a half a dozen of these in the last year and a half or so.
Yes, they have to be submitted for the various vesting periods. So is this the last one? I think this may be the last one.
Okay. Further comments or questions? If not, all in favor? Even those regretfully? Any opposed?
Not regretfully for compensating our employees, but
Good point,
for the
Mike.
process.
Thank you. Any opposed? Carried unanimous. And I guess, looks like that's the end of the resolutions. Is there any further business? Mike?
Just that our chair, Deborah Dawson, sent us an email I saw this afternoon, and she's traveling out of country, and wanted us to know that she'd encountered in the travels many, many homeless encampments, and said it's not just in Ithaca, which I thought was a kind of interesting thing. And that got me to thinking, are we prepared if we get a surge of, let's say, immigrant families here? We know Governor Scott in Texas is about to send some more busloads to New York City, and New York City's not happy. New York City is about to send some busloads to Rockland County, and Rockland County is not happy. And who knows who will be next? And we tend to be kind of open to having folks from other countries live here. At some point, and I hope our Health and Human Services Committee is thinking about this, but we need to be thinking about, if we got a surge of some kind, are we prepared for it? Not only with respect to homeless, but for helping folks get acclimatized to the area and integrate into our community. Just my thought.
I think you probably will be speaking with Chairman Klein from the Health and Human Services, but yes, I read the articles late last night about Rockland County's pushback on the topic, and same thought came to mind. It could happen in other places. Rich?
Yeah, I think Tompkins County has always been welcoming to refugees from other countries and people fleeing political persecution and better opportunities in their lives. I'm trying to pick my words carefully, but it seems like there's a very different dynamic with the homeless population who's currently in the encampments in terms of willingness to take advantage of available services. That I don't want to speak for everybody, but a lot of the people who are living in the encampments would rather be there than take advantage of available resources. Some time ago, I'd spoken to the director of Henry St. John's, who's since left, but he said there actually is shelter capacity that can flex up and down. The big issue is matching the people to the specific need. And we do have good resources in our county to accommodate people who have language issues, that have children, and that need housing. And in fact, we've done a better job with housing small families, adults with children, than these individuals who are in the encampments. And that seems to be a far more stubborn issue of trying to find good housing options for them that they will accept. So hopefully, if we do get a surge, I think we'd be better prepared than we think to accommodate that group. I certainly hope so. But I agree with you entirely, Mike, or Michael, as your parents would want me to say. I'm going to try to use Michael now, but Sir Michael. But that this is a really good thing for us to think about, because it does seem like it's going to spill out from the big cities to places like here. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Rich. Mike? Further comments? Any further business? Brittany?
I did just want to let you all know that I did find the Leslin McBean Claiborne Strength and Diversity Award is for those who support diversity and inclusion in exemplary and integrated ways. So anyone who could be nominated for that. I will also send out an email with this.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for looking that up. Fairly concise. There being no further business, is there a motion to adjourn? Moved and second, Rich, Amanda, all in favor. See you at the meeting next week.
Nicely done, Lee.
Thank you.